by not being a servant. Okay, you have to be
Mhm.
a servant, and that's the key. I feel like also in the role of leadership, again, there's a situation. Again, this goes back to the Luke chapter 16 and skipping down to verse 10. And Jesus again is talking. He said, "Who is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own?" That is the key of servant leadership, because
Mhm.
technically your job, before you can be put in leadership, you have to prove that you can manage someone else's business. So as a director, as a leader, I represent the village that I live in, and that's their business. However,
Mhm.
my job is to make sure that I manage it correctly. And again, that's where you have to sit down, you have to pray, meditate. We'll get into discernment in the next podcast. But these things are not in a vacuum. And I think it's important as it relates to making sure that as a leader, you're not puffed up with pride, you're not puffed up with ego. We talked about that too as well. And it's very, very important to get the input from your staff or whoever it is that you're dealing with. Same thing with a family, same thing in your relationships or anything else. I think that we have to come from a position of humility that we don't know everything. And it's important.
Mhm.
And here's the thing, the collaborative method I find is probably the best out of all the methods that you can have. Why? Because it brings everybody in and everyone has a stake in that decision making process. And so everybody can take their own personal ownership of that particular decision. It's not just on one person. Obviously, the leader is the one that makes the decision. But again, I can't stress enough how important it is to bring in everybody to make sure that that change management is done properly.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you did mention discernment, how, listen to the right voice. Listen to, well, number one, knowing yourself enough to know when you're getting those downloads and having discernment in difficult situations, or when it comes to making a hard decision, such as termination. Like, you don't want to terminate anybody, but if this person isn't a team player, and it's constant need for reprimanding, and a group of people saying this person's not cooperating, having the right discernment, having the wisdom to make hard decisions in the workplace, using those gifts of the Lord and the voice that comes in when you have to do something that lacks, compassion, or like, you don't want to fire anybody, but they're not giving what's needed at that
Mhm.
time. I think that'll be good to get into, because a lot of leaders struggle with that, especially ones that have compassion, that wants to lead a good team and don't want to make hard decisions such as termination or
Mhm.
reprimanding someone. And that's the dirty work. So I
Yep.
guess getting
Yep.
into like doing the dirty work sometimes is what, if you want to judge it,
Yeah.
given to leaders, can be hard for a leader
Yes.
that's working from a high consciousness or a sense of compassion. I would love to get more into that discussion as far as the discernment portion of being a leader and a good steward, and then serving God and making those types of decisions.
Hmm.
How do you do that in the right way when it feels wrong to that person? It's kind
Sure.
of, damaging the person in a way, or
Yep.
taking
Yep.
away from a person. Like, how
Yep.
many times can you warn a person before making such a hard decision? You know what I mean?
Well, let me touch on that. I think you bring up a very key point. So again, we go back to emotional intelligence. This is something that's probably been around maybe a decade. I think in
Hmm.
general, the corporate culture has changed as well. I think that some of these younger folks, the millennial and Gen Z folks, they're not necessarily as regimented. I know when I was coming up, we had a lot of long suffering, and there was things that we had to do that we just didn't like doing. And we
Hmm.
knew that there was responsibilities and things that we had to do, regardless of whether how we felt about it. So that's something that I had to develop, especially in this role that I have now. It was easier when I was at my engineering firms, and even when I was a project manager, it was a little different because really at the end of the day, I didn't have to get into the weeds. At the end of the day, we
Mhm.
had projects that we needed to get done. We had to satisfy the client, and we had schedules and deadlines, and that was it. It was everything was black and white. Anything else that was
Mhm.
going on behind that, it was very easy to have what we call metrics to kind of measure the performance of an individual or a group or a section or a company or whatever the case was. So it was a little easier. And, engineers always had this stigma that we were kind of introverted. We were so technical, we're at technical expertise that we weren't really good communicators or writers. And that hopefully that's changing now in the last couple of years or more, that now engineers have been taught now, and I talk about that in my book. One of my professors kind of jacked our slack when I was a senior at Northwestern, and we were doing special projects, and he was saying that what good is it for you to be intelligent and be able to put these reports together if you can't break it down for lay people to understand? Because those are the people that are going to decide whether or not they're going to approve what it is that you're doing. And so I always, stuck with that. Well, anyway, fast forward. Um, Emotional intelligence is very interesting because, again, when I came on in 2020, we had a very interesting staff, and a lot of people had been there for years. There were some new people coming in, and there was a lot of bad blood from the last previous administration, just how they did things. They would
Mhm.
promise things and not deliver. There was a lot of impropriety going on. I won't go into all of that, but the bottom line is it was a very bad atmosphere. And so coming
Mhm.
into that, I had to first unpack all of that and figure out where everybody was at. Well, I still had an old mindset, hey, this got to be done. I don't care about anything else that's going on. This is what needs to be done. And not understanding the emotional intelligence. In other words, I really am a believer as a leader to have one-on-one meetings. I have some coming up next month too with all of my staff. Even though I
Mhm.
think we're doing very well, there's another level that we can get to. And I still want feedback from my folks. So I didn't have that knowledge when I first got there. And I struggled when it came to conflict resolution. There was things that happened. Coworkers couldn't get along. Somebody was fighting over their section of territory, and they wouldn't communicate with the other person as far as scheduling is concerned. And of course, this is before our technology, and now everything, all the scheduling now is automated. But they had to communicate. Hey, I got this section this today. I'm doing this and doing that. And sometimes it became really, really bad when I decided to do
Mhm.
change management and try to, implement things really quickly, everything kind of went left. It went bad. And so, to your point, I hated conflict. I hate even to this day, it's the dirty work you mentioned, but it's got to be
Yeah.
done. But before we get to that, as a leader, you have to do your due diligence to figure out the pulse of your group, to find out what works, what doesn't, what their concerns are, and give them an opportunity to give you feedback. Because when you're developing
Mhm.
policies and procedures, you want to make sure you don't do that in a vacuum. Again, it's a collaborative effort. And bad leaders end up being more totalitarian. They tend to be more, I'm dropping a hammer, do as I say, and things of that nature. And it's very little feedback. And when you do that, it's a morale killer, number one. And number two, let's be real, they can actually sabotage what it is you're doing. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, upper management doesn't care about what the internal issues are. They're going to look at you. They're not going to look at your staff. They're going to say, why
Right.
did you fix this? We put
Right.
you in this position to make this organization go or make your department work. Why didn't you do it? So you're not going to be judged on how smart you are, how technically astute you are. That's not why we have you in this position. We have you in this position to look at things from a 40,000-foot view, number one, and number two, to make sure that your team is working well. And at the end of the day, to get done the tasks that need to be done so that the organization can be well. So those are intricate, tasks and things that we're supposed to do as a leader. And again, that's when you have to humble yourself. You have to be a servant leader. you have to be almost at the bottom and come to them in a situation that say, hey, look, I have got your back, but I'm going to need you to do X, Y, Z and get them to get the buy-in. Now, some people, no matter what you do, they just won't fit. Okay. And we hope to eliminate that or make that a situation where that's very rare. That's your goal. You're always going to have problem people in the organization. But at the end of the day, document, document, document that we went through a whole list of things before we got to the nuclear button, if you will. So that would be some of the things that I learned in the last couple of years. Emotional intelligence is very important because people can have family issues going on. They can have health issues that they could, things can be going on. They may feel like they're stressed out. They're not getting support. Hey, what do you need? What can we do to help your job or your position so that you can be more effective? And things of that nature. So you have to ask those questions because you don't want to assume anything. And you can actually lose a good person because as a leader, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And again, it's always going to come back to you because it won't matter what happened. They're only going to look at you and say, why didn't you do the things you needed to do? Is something you didn't say? Is something you didn't do? And again, the words coming out of your mouth is important. What you say is important. People listen to that. And so I just think, again, it's a very sensitive, critical position to be a leader. And everybody is not cut out to be a leader either. And that's okay too. At the end of the day, it's a unique skill set and you have to do the work and you have to get in the weeds, if you will, as a leader to get to the bottom of what needs to happen. So hopefully, like I said, you may have problem people in the organization, but my hope is at the end of the day, that'll be few and far between and we can get as many people on board as possible. That's what I would say to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really enjoy talking, discussing almost like everyday problems, concerns, or growth management while being a manager, in the role of a manager, leadership. These are just great topics and kind of like really is a biblical mechanics, like a little Bible that you're keeping with yourself at work because these things happen. It's life. Life continues at the workplace. It continues afterwards. And oftentimes you'll hear people say, don't bring work home. But
Right.
sometimes you're in a position where it's like, this is life. Like you make it your life. You make it priority and you don't mean to bring it home, but these are things and decisions and people and situations that you're dealing with from 9 to 5, and knowing when to cut that off is a thing because it's like sometimes it can get stressful. Sometimes it's hunting your mind like, man, I need to make these changes. I
Yeah.
need to it's always like some type of internal scheduling. So I think when you speak of change management, as we spoke of before, it's so prevalent as well as building that good team, having integrity, all the principles that you mentioned, Ernest, is so relevant in the workplace. And if you haven't already, please read the book, The Law of Biblical Mechanics, because it is so on point with all that you might experience in the office and then applying these I call them holy methods to keep your heart and your compassion and not get too much in your mind and your brain and your feelings. Like you said, having that emotional intelligence, it helps so much what you talk about in the book and on the podcast, Ernest. And it's always a pleasure on my end to share this space with you and have this discussion because I'm taking it as I'm growing up my career ladder and working with individuals and learning to manage difficult tasks and situations in my own career. It's almost like this is divine order to be speaking with you at this time of life.
Yeah,
So
I appreciate that. And
I
I just
appreciate you, Ernest.
yeah, yeah. I just wanted to say that I just want to leave with this statement that, I believe that, God expects production. When you see poverty anywhere, it's a lack of production and it's a lack of productivity anywhere in the world. We're supposed to be excellent and we're supposed to operate on a level that God expects us to operate. When Jesus was here on the earth, he gave certain principles and certain doctrines and things of that nature that were hidden truths. Okay, and so we have to
Mhm.
sometimes slow down and really understand the keys of life. And that's why I wrote the book in the first place, because I wanted a manual, something that wasn't too long, but that people can read it and refer to it over and over again. I'm still learning things as we're talking to as well. And I'm going, wow, I never saw that before. I read that 100 times, but I never saw that. So, revelation knowledge is
Mhm.
always there. And that's what puts you ahead of information, ahead of education. And like I said, we'll deal with
Mhm.
that in future podcasts. We'll drill down on that. But God expects us to be excellent. He expects us to operate on a high level because he wants a return on his investment. Every human being that's on this planet has a purpose and has a gift that nobody else on this planet has. There's over 8 billion people on this planet, and you have something that nobody else has. It's your job to bring it out, to execute it, and it will bring you in front of kings and priests. And it will put you on top if you work it long and hard enough and do what you need to do. We need to be consistently consistent. So I just wanted to kind of leave you with that. But it's always a pleasure when we do these, because I think that, again, it's blessing me as we're talking. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Mhm. Absolutely. And yeah, just to piggyback off of, God's expectation, who would think of God's expectation of us, right? Because we always thinking of ourselves and our own
Yep.
expectations that we create for others, but who really key in on looking at what does God want from me? What is my purpose? What am I here for? So I think that'll be good to get into as well once we meet again. We're going to be meeting, by the way, for those that's listening. January 4th is going to be the next Sunday we air, and we're going to get into this discussion topics based around the discernment portion and, getting clarity. I think that that'll be good for the audience, especially going into this new year season, new year, new levels, new devils, as they put it, sometimes new opportunities as well, new opportunities for growth and leadership
Yep.
and management in your own realm. I know a lot of the time the job market goes up at the beginning of the year. A lot of people are applying for new
Yes.
roles, new positions after working so hard so many years and not seeing that growth in that one company. The beginning of the year is always room for growth. So if
Hmm.
we could get more into that in our next podcast to help those
Sure.
out there that might be seeking that type of leadership and
Yep.
guidance, Ernest is the go-to. And you can find Ernest on Instagram, Facebook, now available on podcasts via Spotify, iHeartRadio. You can contact him via his website as well, in which you'll hear more information at the end of this podcast. Once again, Ernest, it's always a pleasure. Happy Sunday.
Absolutely.
Many
Yes.
blessings to you and your
Yes.
family.
Yes. You as well. And it's always great to get together. And I look forward to, I would say 2025, it's time to come alive.
Okay, yes, that's the motto. I love that.
That just came to me
2025.
while we were talking. So yeah, it's time. It's really time to go to another level. So I definitely you all received that.
Yes, yes, sending that out there. All right. Peace, peace and blessings to all. Enjoy the holiday seasons. Be safe. The Chicagoland area and Illinois, all around the world. Be safe out there. Peace.
Take care.